carefully read the instructions on the back of the bottle or the packet or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it is so easy to injure yourself, and particularly with children. Because, the children, if you don't have your cupboards locked and so on and so forth,
they'll go and check it
they'll see bright coloured bottles, and what do they associate with that? Soft drinks and whatever, you know.
Hello and welcome back to the Crimeshield Podcast, where we talk about safety and security every day. And today we are at the 3rd Annual Security Summit that is being held at Mercure Hotel. We are going to talk about a topic that not many people engage in, but it's really part and parcel of our lifetime. We're going to talk about hazards in general. And to help us understand this topic, the chemical hazards. What are we supposed to look into? What are the challenges that we face? The future kind of threats that we're looking at. CBRNE, you name it, is none other than Mr. Rolland Stockholm. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for creating time to come to the Crimeshield Podcast. Mr. Rolland, kindly tell us about yourself.
Okay. My background, a civil servant for 6 years, working in a central office in the United Kingdom. I then decided I need a radical change in my life. I was a young man and the world's my oyster, so to speak. So I joined the army, and I spent 22 and a little bit years in the army.
Wow.
And what did I do in the army? Well, I did a number of different appointments. Some of them were of a logistical nature. Some of them were more combat orientated. I specialized in nuclear, biological, chemical. I was an instructor in the military for that. I also dealt a little bit with reconnaissance and related issues. And I visited some interesting countries.
Wow.
There we are.
Amazing. Like for me, I'm also a HAZMAT technician, and I had the privilege of setting foot at Trinity, where the first testing of the nuclear weapon was in the USA. And it was an amazing experience, and that's why I find this topic really a topic to be discussed, because what we take nowadays in the whole world involves some elements of chemicals. And in your profession, there's a lot of inspection that goes on. And there are risks also associated with the usage and even disposal of these chemicals. Take an example. We have a lot of containers and shipments coming in many countries, and we want to take Africa for that context. So kindly tell us, what should we look into when we're talking about inspecting these tankers? We see them containerized in the trucks on the road. We have them being shipped by ship at the sea. What are the level of risks that you look at when you're doing the inspections and all that?
So just to paint a picture for the audience, when I'd left the military, I secured a position with OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And whilst I was employed by OPCW, primarily I was a logistics officer for the organization. But because of my background, I was also an inspector, chemical weapons, munitions specialist inspector, and an investigator for incidents where there may have been what we call alleged use. If there'd been an incident, we would go and investigate. So I was involved in that. And when I left OPCW, I went to Vienna, where I worked for an organization called the CTBTO, the Comprehensive Task Ban Treaty Organization. I went there as a consultant, and my time there was involved in the logistics side, of course, but also operational and planning for deployment of teams for investigation of nuclear tests underground. So I don't think people really understand, as you quite rightly said, the dangerous world in which we live. I'm not talking now in a military way or a terrorist way, but the nature of the lifestyle we have. We are surrounded by chemicals, and we have a saying in logistics that you never put a cat and a dog in the same bag.
Yeah.
And the incompatibility of certain chemicals, a lot of people wouldn't be aware of. And for example, in a normal household kitchen, you will have bleaches and detergents, corrosive elements, and so on and so forth, which some people sort of pay lip service to. But if they were to do a little bit of investigation, certainly when you're using them, you may have experienced it yourself. You know, when you use a very strong bleach or something, a cleaning agent.
Corrosive.
You know, you can feel that if you breathe it in, you can feel it, you know. So we have to be very, very careful. So that's just in your household, for example. Now when you consider factories that produce chemicals, the transportation of chemicals, and so on and so forth, it could be a major, major issue. And your audience will be aware of, for example, in Beirut, the huge explosion, which didn't happen just the once, but there were subsequent explosions in the same facility of towers where the chemicals had been left. So that was an example. There was another example, a tragic incident in India where lots of people died, a place called Bhopal, where there was a leak from a facility there. So another incident. We also had, I can't recall exactly where, but you may have seen on the news where a container was being moved from a ship, and the container fell to the ground,
and it exploded.
And there was it ruptured, and you then seen the release of chlorine. Of course, chlorine will kill you.
Yes.
So the people there, some of them, I believe, I'm not 100% certain, but may have died. But I think people were surprised, but how quickly the gas spread. And of course,
chlorine gas. That is
chlorine gas. Yes. And of course, gases have lots of properties. So you can have a heavy gas which will hug the ground and seep into any open, like a trench, for example. Or you have light gases that will rise up. So if you're in a train, for example, and you know there's a gas release of certain substances, it would be lighter than air and it would rise up. So there are all different sorts of properties of the different gases. I think when it comes to the transportation of these substances, the rules and regulations are certainly in place, and we have to comply with all the rules and regulations. Certainly, I was involved in deployment of our teams globally. We would send teams all over the world doing different things. And of course, we have to comply with a variety of rules and regulations. And I think one of the areas where things are moving in the right direction, at the moment we have a different set of rules and regulations for shipping, for railways, for rail, and for road transport. And of course, not all rules and regulations are the same in every country.
They are different.
There is a move to harmonize the rules and regulations, certainly in the EU and the UK, they're very, very similar. The US, of course, but there is a movement to harmonize globally all the rules and regulations, and eventually, rather than having a set of rules and regulations for rail, road, shipping, and air transport, you would have a general set of rules and regulations, of course, with an Appendix 4 and the same symbols in use. So this would make life certainly much easier for companies transporting the chemicals. Are certainly cheaper. It would also help not only for them, but you must imagine, you know, the customs officials, the port authorities, and so on and so forth. You know, when they're coming to inspect and what they're looking for. Well, it depends on the method of shipment. Certainly, air transportation is very well tied down by the very nature of aircraft. They can only take a limited amount of cargo, and the rules are regulated, certainly by IATA, the regulating body. They are fairly stringent, and rightly so. For others, of course, they can take much larger quantities of
like ship.
Take a ship, for example. I look at the ships sometimes. The ones loaded up with containers coming from China, for example, Japan, South Korea. And I often ask myself why these ships don't capsize
Yeah,
or turn over.
deck on deck. Yeah.
I look at them and I think, in a turbulent sea, and I've been at sea in storms, and I don't recommend it to your audience. Okay, certainly not. If you like me, I get seasick if I'm in the shower.
Oh.
So I go a different shades of green. But I often wonder about those containers and, of course, how they're packed. Things will shift.
Yeah.
So
to take you a little bit back, Rolland, we want to talk about the chemical thing, stuff we have in the house, household stuff. It puzzles me that not many people take time to read instructions at the back.
No.
People don't.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
No. I surprisingly recently, my wife was saying to me, apparently every job in the house is the husband's job. And ladies, I do apologize. I'm just jesting. No, I'm not. But anyway, she'd bought some chemical. I don't know the name of it. It doesn't spring to mind. But it's to clean the dishwasher. So you pour this stuff into the container in the dishwasher, and off it goes. And when you open it, it's all sparkly clean and so on.
Wow.
But I looked at this. I'd never seen it before. And before I use anything, old habits die hard.
Yes.
And I thought, I'll read this. And on the back, it said, that if this stuff drops on your skin, you must immediately wash your hands. It's corrosive. Now, I recognize the symbol, but I wonder how many people would firstly read the instructions, and secondly would recognize the symbols. So I think the companies try their best
to label their stuff.
You can only do so much, and then it's down to the individual.
Yeah.
Looking at the other side of life, of course, if you're looking at household effects, there are some people who you put them in a kitchen and they can go and make a bomb with household, IED,
asymmetrical
explosive device.
Asymmetrical
but
warfare.
that's not many housewives would be doing that. Certainly, no, hopefully. But there's certain caution I think should be taken by anybody buying anything. Read the instructions. I always say to people, if you don't know, take a step back and read the instructions.
Yeah.
And even to this day, and it makes my wife laugh, because I mentioned a little earlier today in one of the lectures we were giving, that you can take the man out of the military, but you can't take the military out of the man. And for example, when I get up in the morning, one of the first things I do is I walk around my house, just checking everything.
Surveillance.
It's ingrained in me to go and check. I always check plugs and so on. I'm not saying to the ladies and gentlemen who are watching the broadcast, you maybe don't have to be, perhaps you might consider as paranoid as that. But it's just a thing that's ingrained in me. And it took me some time. I was on holiday again with my wife and two of my children, and I couldn't get out of the habit of, if I wasn't using something, not packing it away. And of course, the ladies and gentlemen who were listening will think, well, that's a good thing. But I was actually on holiday, and this was my suitcase. And my wife said, why are you putting everything back in the suitcase? I said, well, I'm finished with it. She said, but you're on holiday. And the other thing
they had.
The other thing I do, and this is from my time as chemical weapons inspector, is that the work by its nature, it's very, very slow, because we have to be extremely slow and methodical, checking for vapors and droplets and so on and so forth. And one of the things I still do, if I'm walking down the road, and when you see droplets of oil from a car and so on, I automatically walk around them. Because, if we saw any droplets and things, it's indicative. There's something there.
Yes.
Again, it's just second nature with me, and my advice would be to anybody is that when you're buying something, carefully read the instructions on the back of the bottle or the packet or whatever. Because it is so easy to injure yourself, and particularly with children, because the children, if you don't have your cupboards locked and so on and so forth,
They'll go and check it
they'll see bright coloured bottles, and what do they associate with that? Soft drinks and whatever, or they'll see tablets, dishwasher tablets, for example, and they'll think, oh, sweets. I mean, the worst thing, of course, is the little round lithium batteries, which are lethal. And there's been lots of cases where children have swallowed these, and of course, when they break open in the stomach, the effects of acid, sadly, some people have died. So you have to be meticulous in your hygiene when it comes to using any chemical at all. Other incidents, not specifically about chemicals as such, but there has been some recent incidents. There's one I use in one of my presentations where there was a coal train. And the coal train was trundling along merrily. It was in America. And it was a simple thing where the axle of the train was defective. Sometimes accidents will happen at the wrong time in the wrong place. So this was a coal train, and it caught fire. It caught fire on top of a bridge. The bridge was a wooden bridge to really add to the problem.
To injury,
And of course, it being a coal train, and coal dust is one of those things that is really, really combustible. And
catches fire so easy.
Big explosion. So even the simplest of things, can escalate before you know. Things in your house, turpentine, and so on. For example, I do some lessons on forensics, crime scene investigation. And of course, when the fire brigade guys are going into wherever they happen to be, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for traces of accelerant to see if it's arson or if it was another problem. So there's all these things that people just paint thinner, turpentine, all these inflammable products. And what do people do? Well, we've got half a bottle of this and some of that and some of that. We'll just put it under the cupboard, or we'll put it in the attic or in the cellar. And of course, these things will vaporize. And so on and so forth.
And it spreads so fast.
It's a fire hazard in some cases. Could be an explosive hazard. It could also be a vapor hazard.
We've seen in Kenya lately, we've seen the motorbike riders using LPG gas cylinder as an alternative for fuel, and that's it's chemical in nature, of course, and without them having measures to make sure that they really look at the safety, because I know with LPG gas, we all know the basic heat, shock, and friction can really spark up something, and there's an explosion. So what could be your advice to people who leverage on using? We even have vehicles as an alternative use of fuel. They use LPG, the gas cylinders, as an alternative. Is it something that is good, or is it a hazard to themselves?
With the way the world is going, and we see on the horizon a number of issues that are looming, and a group I belong to, a company I'm one of the founding members of, we are looking at the use of green hydrogen, for example, and alternative fuels, biofuels of all different types. We need fuel. Our society demands fuel. It's a critical part of our infrastructure. If it's properly controlled and the regulations are in place for the use of liquid petroleum, so on and so forth, all well and good. But you can have regulations in place that affect the shops or the garages that sell these commodities. You can also have those regulations in place for the companies that produce the cylinders and fill them with gas and so on and so forth. But and I know that a lot of people, they won't take heed.
They'll take the shortcut.
And then we have to think, well, how do you get rid of problems? Well, there's different ways of getting rid of problems, and certainly one of the ways is that you engineer the problem out of existence. So if the cylinders are in some way they can be problematic, then you will redesign the cylinders. And of course this would be government regulation, and it would be beholden upon the private sector to comply. But also the private sector, they can take a lead in these things because, the private sector, of course, they're the experts in many ways because they produce the goods, they understand the goods, they are the subject matter experts. Not necessarily government officials will be the same. There will be some agencies, of course there will.
True.
But there needs to be cooperation between the private sector and the government to ensure that the young people, for example, or elderly people maybe who aren't as careful as they should be, they are aware. And statistically, thinking about occupational health now, for example, the statistics for accidents, the highest in lots of cases is young people.
True.
And why is that the case? Well, young people, they won't have that much life experience because they're young.
Yeah.
Okay. And it could also be that, it's a combination of enthusiasm, which is a good thing. They've got a job and they want to see they do the best they can, but they won't have the knowledge or the training to live in really I'm not trying to be difficult here. An unsafe environment. A factory floor is, if you don't know, it's full of hazards. And if they haven't been given the proper training, as we've seen by statistics, highest casualty rate can be amongst young people.
Because they're the ones who are active.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to be wary and teach your young people. And there should be government legislation about health and safety. You have factory acts and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that in Kenya and throughout African countries that they will have these in place. Perhaps they may want to harmonise, regulations, not only for health and safety, but also I would suggest lorry drivers, for example. A common standard and set of rules for the training of lorry drivers. And those lorry drivers who are going to be responsible for the transportation of dangerous goods, they should be au fait with all the regulations. You might even say they should have regular medicals and update
checks,
training. And certainly when it comes to the police, they should, I know they will, they'll be looking out for vehicles that are not roadworthy, particularly with these vehicles. Take, for example, if there was a car crash, and I have some footage where there's been, in the US, a car crash involving a petrol tanker, for example. And these things, it was a petrol tank, it is a huge bomb. And you, fortunately, this one was on a busy highway, but it was in the countryside. If you could imagine if a petrol tanker's driving in downtown Nairobi and there's a serious incident and the thing gets rammed and there's sparks, it's a dangerous situation.
Chaos,
What can you do? Well, I mean, you could say, for example, petrol tankers will only drive along certain routes at certain times, so they would avoid rush hours, for example. They would be routed so they avoid congested areas, areas where a lot of people are living, and so on and so forth. So there is always a solution to the problem. It's just sometimes a matter of thinking logically and laterally.
And also willingness to, put in the, practice whatever you've been told to do.
Exactly.
Like in Kenya right now, we've seen they use the Southern Bypass. There's a route called the Southern Bypass that is designated for truck drivers, and especially when they're using, when they are ferrying dangerous goods. That is the route that they take it. But at the same time, you still find other truck drivers on the main highway carrying dangerous goods. So it really takes the initiative and also educating the people who actually own these companies, the transportation companies, to properly mark their lorries and their trucks well educate the drivers and also have them undergo regular, physical checks,
Yes.
like medical checks. Because at the end of it all, you find that exposure, as you mentioned, to this kind of hazardous materials, I might call them that, it can really cause a lot of damage health-wise. Yeah.
It may surprise some of our listeners. They will remember the events of 9/11.
Yes.
And the casualty rate was very, very high, but it didn't stop there. And a lot of the people who were outside of the incident, the firemen, for example, years down the road, those people were dying of carcinogenic illnesses because they'd breathed in
exposure, their
the
dosage,
poison and the fumes from the fire and so on, and they developed cancer. And I was reading recently a study about the statistics about firemen, fire ladies, and the incidence rates of different types of cancer. So this is another area that probably needs to be addressed. I would also suggest perhaps, and I'm not an expert on the law in Kenya, I don't know, but maybe you could have the regulation that it would be illegal to hire a company to transport certain categories of goods unless they had the official license to do so.
Okay.
And it puts the onus on both the people who are doing the transportation and the people who are asking them to do the transportation.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's just an idea.
Amazing. As we wind up, Rolland, I'd like you to tell us 5 things you'd advise, Kenyan people in line with your expertise in chemical inspection on the things that they can look forward to, or check when they are in their household. What should they do when they are purchasing anything of chemical in nature?
Okay. I live in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And the law in the Netherlands stipulates that in your house you have to have smoke detectors.
Okay.
Not only one. I think it depends on the size of your house, of course. But I think you have to have 2 or 3, perhaps more, fire detectors.
Okay.
Okay. So my advice would be install fire detectors in your house. Secondly, if you do have young children, either your children or children visiting, grandkids, the neighbours' kids, but to make sure that wherever you store bleach, for example, or the corrosive materials, cleaning materials, that they're in a cupboard that is either up high, out of the reach of small, curious hands, okay, or it's locked.